Welcome to the deep dive. We often hear that knowledge is power, but what if sometimes getting that power means looking strategically beyond, well, your usual borders?
Definitely. And today we're looking at a perspective that uses some pretty striking language for that kind of move.
Yeah, things like strategic sovereignty, liberation, even a declaration of independence.
Exactly. That strong framing comes directly from our source material today. It's a text from Swiss economist Dr. Pooyan Ghamari titled UAE Free Zones, Tax and Residency for Europeans.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is to really get into this text and understand why the author thinks setting up a company in a UAE free zone isn't just, a smart business move, but potentially a game changer for Europeans looking for jurisdictional diversification.
Right. What are the actual arguments, the insights in the text that lead to using terms like safe haven or this idea of strategic sovereignty?
That language certainly jumps out. It suggests the author sees this whole thing as a response to some pretty serious pressures back in Europe, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It frames the UAE option as something potentially quite fundamental for someone's financial and operational freedom.
Okay, so let's start there then. What's the European context the author lays out? Why would someone be looking for this kind of alternative?
Well, the text paints a fairly clear picture of challenges. High taxes are a big one, mentioning countries like Germany and France, where top marginal income tax rates can push past, 45, even 50%.
Wow.
But it's apparently not just the rates. The author also points to what they call rigid regulations and shrinking financial privacy. They bring up things like DC6 and CRS.
Right, those are the EU and international frameworks for automatic information exchange on tax matters.
Exactly. And the source argues that these systems, whatever their aim, really ramp up the reporting burden and make it harder to manage international assets discreetly. So the perspective presented is that operating purely onshore in Europe is starting to feel like a liability for some.
Well, liability, use
Mhm.
that strong language again. So with that as the backdrop, how is the UAE positioned as the answer?
The text describes it as more than just a business hub. It uses the term modern geopolitical safe haven. And the core idea is that setting up a UAE free zone company acts as an instrument of leverage. It gives you structural optionality.
Structural optionality, like it creates fundamental new choices that just aren't there in the European system the author describes.
Precisely that. It's about building a different foundation for your business, your assets. One that the author claims offers very specific advantages over staying put.
Okay, let's break down those advantages and the leverage points mentioned in the source. Tax has got to be number one, right?
Oh, absolutely. The text is very explicit. It states 0% income tax for individuals, zero.
0%. Okay.
For companies, it mentions a corporate tax rate that's either 0% or 9%, depending on turnover levels and exactly what the business does within the free zone. And crucially, no capital gains tax, no inheritance tax.
That's a huge difference from the European picture. The author makes a kind of philosophical point too, don't they?
Yes, they do. The text says the UAE does not penalize prosperity. It frames this whole tax setup as a core part of their economic approach, contrasting it directly with what the author sees in Europe, where success and wealth often attract, well, heavier tax burdens.
Interesting. Okay, beyond tax, the source talks a lot about getting residency through owning the company. How does that work, according to the text?
Yeah, this is presented as really central. Basically, by setting up and owning your free zone company, you, the owner, can have your own company sponsor you for a UAE residency visa.
And is there a time frame given for that?
Yes, the source suggests it's pretty quick, often within about 3 to 6 weeks after the company itself is formed, and it notes the residency is renewable, typically every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
It comes with essentials like medical insurance, you get an Emirates ID card, and importantly, you have the option to sponsor your family members for residency too.
That sounds quite different from things like golden visas in Europe.
The author makes that comparison directly. They argue golden visas often need big real estate investments or involve slow, complex bureaucracy. The text really stresses that this UAE residency isn't just symbolic.
Right.
It gives you real access healthcare, banking becomes much easier, you can use all the infrastructure like anyone else living there.
Okay, banking. The source actually calls that the silent superpower.
Mhm.
Why such a strong term? What's so special about it?
Well, the argument is that having the free zone company and the residency unlocks multi-currency corporate banking that's independent of, the tightening regulations you might see in the EU.
Ah, I see.
The text gives examples banks like Emirates, NBD, RAK Bank, Mashreq, WIO. It says you can hold accounts easily in dirhams, US dollars, euros, sterling,
Hmm.
and connect globally using standard things like IBAN and SWIFT codes.
The usual international banking stuff.
Exactly, and having your personal residency also means you can open a personal account easily, which makes moving money between your business and personal life much smoother. For anyone operating internationally, the source basically says this kind of robust, separate banking isn't just nice to have, it's a necessity.
So, banking independence, tax benefits, quick residency. What about control? Sometimes setting up abroad means needing a local partner,
Yeah,
right?
it's a common concern, yeah. But the source makes a point of highlighting that UAE free zones give you 100% foreign ownership, no local partner needed, full control.
Okay, that's key. And it mentions IP rights are protected internationally, and profits can be taken out freely.
That's right, full repatriation of profits. And it adds a detail for smaller businesses in many zones. There are apparently no audit requirements, which simplifies things.
Hmm.
The author sums it up by saying this structure makes your capital fluid, mobile, and private.
And they also quickly mention things like asset protection, legal stability, no currency controls. It all seems to feed that main theme, doesn't it? Building control, reducing exposure, the strategic sovereignty idea.
Exactly. According to the source, each benefit adds a layer to this kind of jurisdictional shield they describe. A structure offering more protection and freedom compared to operating directly from, say, a high-tax European base.
Right. So with those benefits explained, the source then gives some practical examples. What kind of businesses or situations does it suggest are a good fit for this UAE free zone approach?
It lists quite a few. Things like running a digital agency or a SaaS business, good for international billing and tax, using the company purely for asset protection, setting up a crypto or Web3 project in a potentially more favorable regulatory space,
Okay.
or basing international e-commerce operations there, even structuring income from consulting or remote work, potentially shifting income from a high personal tax rate to a lower corporate one.
And the idea is that in all these cases, the company acts as that jurisdictional shield.
Yes, that's the recurring concept, a legal and financial buffer operating under UAE rules.
The source also seems to lay out the process itself, suggesting it's quite defined.
Yeah, it outlines a typical path. Starts with consultation and planning the structure, then the actual company formation. After that, getting the residency visa processed, then sorting out the bank account, and finally, ongoing support. It even mentions the company formation part can be really quick, like 1 to 5 days potentially.
And it specifically mentions an entity called A.Land in relation to this process. How is A.Land presented in the text?
Well, the source describes them as being more than just a setup agent. They're positioned, according to the text, as a strategic partner or advisor, someone to guide you through the whole thing.
What sort of support do they apparently offer?
The list in the source is pretty broad. Help with setting up the entity itself, mentioning zones like SPC, IFCA, Reiki Z, DMCC, assistance with the residency visas, even family relocation, tax structuring advice specifically for Europeans moving into this,
Right.
help coordinating with the banks, which can sometimes be tricky, and even connections for things like finding property, digital infrastructure, or other investment opportunities.
And the author uses that kind of evocative language again, saying A.Land speaks the language of risk, opportunity, and sovereignty.
Yeah, it really ties back into the source's main narrative.
Yeah.
This isn't just paperwork. It's framed as a major strategic decision about control and independence in, today's world.
Well, we've certainly unpacked quite a bit from the source material today, really exploring why the author uses such strong terms for UAE free zones and European investors. We've looked at the pressures described in Europe, how the UAE structure is presented as a solution with benefits around tax, residency, banking, control. We look at those use cases in the process described.
And the text consistently frames this not just as an option, but as a significant, almost necessary strategic shift for people wanting more control over their financial lives, given the economic pressures the author perceives.
So, thinking only about what we've discussed from this specific source today, here's a final thought for you, the listener. Does the material we've examined make a convincing case that seeking jurisdictional independence, maybe through something like a UAE free zone, is becoming essential for financial resilience now? Or is that powerful language of sovereignty and liberation perhaps more of a strong metaphor used by the author to describe escaping specific pressures they highlighted? Something to think about.
It's a really interesting question that the text definitely leaves you pondering.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.